monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change.
Imagine standing in front of hundreds of people, cameras flashing, dignitaries watching your every move, and in that single moment, you're deliberately pushed aside like you don't belong. Your worst nightmare just became real, and everyone watching knows exactly what just happened. This is the story of how a few seconds of public humiliation triggered a chain reaction that shook the entire monarchy to its core. And what happened next will absolutely shock you. A prince made a decision that nobody saw coming. A king was forced to choose between two people he loves, and a queen consort learned that power and influence aren't the same thing. If you're ready to discover what really goes on behind palace walls and how one family resolved one of the biggest conflicts to ever hit the royal family, then you absolutely need to watch till the end, because I'm about to reveal details that will blow your mind. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we drop stories like this all the time, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Let's dive in. What you're about to hear isn't just gossip or tabloid nonsense. This is the untold story of how a carefully constructed royal system nearly crumbled when dignity and duty collided head-on. For decades, the monarchy has thrived on protocol, tradition, and an unspoken understanding that certain boundaries should never be crossed. But what happens when someone powerful decides those boundaries don't apply to them? What happens when a younger generation decides to fight back? The answer to those questions changed everything we thought we knew about the future royal family. This story begins with a moment so small that most people missed it. But that moment carried so much weight that it forced a king to make an impossible choice. Between protecting his wife or protecting his son's future reign, Charles faced a decision that would either heal the family or wound it forever. Catherine, the future queen, had to decide whether to speak up and risk being seen as difficult, or stay silent and accept being diminished. And Camilla, she had to come to terms with a truth that shook her to her core. You can climb all the way to the top of the mountain and still be told you don't belong there. Let's start by understanding what actually happened at Windsor. Picture this scene: a major royal ceremony, important guests arriving, photographers everywhere, and Catherine taking her position for what should have been a proud moment representing the next generation of the monarchy. She was supposed to lead a formal presentation. This wasn't just about standing in a particular spot. It was about being visibly recognized as important, as someone who matters in the hierarchy of royal life. Then Camilla stepped in. Without warning, without explanation, the queen consort told Catherine to move, step aside, let someone else take the lead. Catherine didn't argue. She didn't make a scene. She simply obeyed, because that's what you do when someone senior tells you to do something in that world. But everyone in that room understood what that moment meant. Staff members exchanged looks. Photographers captured it. Dignitaries noticed. The message was crystal clear. You are not as important as we're going to pretend you are. This is where the story gets really interesting, because what happened next shows you how someone who appears completely put together on the surface can actually be breaking inside. Catherine walked into a corridor, away from the cameras, and when she was finally alone, she stopped beside a console table and held onto it. Her hands were gripping that edge so hard you could see her knuckles turning white. When William found her, she didn't need to say much. Her voice was quiet, but the emotion behind it was absolutely unmistakable. I will not go through this again. That's not someone just having a bad day. That's someone reaching their breaking point. William didn't respond right away. He just watched his wife walk away, and something inside him changed. He realized that staying silent about this wasn't going to keep the peace. In fact, staying silent would be saying that what happened was completely fine, that humiliating Catherine in front of all those people was acceptable behavior. So William did something that shocked everyone who found out about it later. He moved fast. He called in two senior officials from the royal household and told them exactly what he wanted. Camilla's ceremonial coordinating authority was being removed, effective immediately. No gradual transition, no softened language, no private conversations to smooth things over. This wasn't a gentle suggestion. This was a prince using his position to make a concrete change. The ceremonial coordinating role might sound complicated, but here's what it actually means. It's the power to decide where senior royals stand during formal events, who leads what part of the ceremony, and basically who gets the prominent positions. Camilla had been using that authority, to put Catherine in smaller roles, and William decided that was never going to happen again. But here's where things get truly dramatic. Charles, the king himself, didn't even know about this change until after it had already been officially recorded. William didn't ask permission. He didn't have conversations first. He just made the decision and sent the revised ceremonial order to his father afterward. When Charles read that document, he understood immediately why his son had acted. But the king also knew something that nobody else did. This conflict didn't just appear out of nowhere. There was history here, real tension, and William's anger had been building for a long time. See, what most people don't realize is that this Windsor incident wasn't actually the beginning of the problem. It was the second time this exact same thing had happened. Weeks earlier, during rehearsals for another royal ceremony at Buckingham Palace, Catherine and Camilla had already clashed over the same exact issue. The future queen had arrived expecting a routine rehearsal for a diplomatic reception. She was supposed to stand beside William in a senior greeting position, which is exactly where the future queen should stand, right next to the future king. It's symbolic of their place as the next generation of leadership. But then Camilla intervened. She told the ceremonial team to move Catherine farther down the line, away from where she was originally supposed to be. Catherine was confused at first. She thought maybe they'd changed the schedule for practical reasons, so she quietly asked if something had shifted. An official hesitated before explaining that the instruction had actually come directly from Camilla, not from Charles, and not because protocol required it. That answer changed everything. Catherine realized this wasn't some innocent adjustment. Someone had deliberately chosen to reduce her visibility and importance. So Catherine waited until the rehearsal was completely finished, and then she approached Camilla in private. She didn't accuse her of anything. She simply asked if she'd done something wrong, and Camilla's response? It was absolutely chilling. With complete calm, the queen consort said, "Some roles belong to the present, not the future." Those words carried so much weight. It wasn't just about where Catherine stood in that moment. It was a direct warning about her place, her visibility, her influence, and basically how much she was allowed to step forward. William walked in right after this conversation ended and found his wife unusually quiet. Catherine told him exactly what had been said, and she asked him to please not confront Camilla about it immediately. But William was frustrated. You could see it all over his face. Before he left that room, Catherine picked up her name card, placed it back in the original position beside William, looked at him for one long moment, and then took it away again and followed Camilla's revised arrangement. That small gesture stuck with William because it showed him how much his wife was willing to swallow just to keep the peace. William did go and speak privately with Charles about what had happened at Buckingham Palace. He warned the king that Catherine could never be deliberately diminished during her official duties again. It was a clear line being drawn. Charles promised to handle the matter quietly and discreetly, but here's the thing, nothing actually changed. Camilla kept the same ceremonial power. The same authority that had allowed her to move Catherine around was still there, and William remembered that failure. He remembered that his father had made a promise and then essentially done nothing about it. So when Windsor happened weeks later, when the exact same pattern repeated itself publicly in front of even more people, William's patience completely disappeared. His restraint vanished. The warning had already been given once, and this time he wasn't going to accept excuses or half measures. This time, there would be a real conversation. No palace buffers, no aides in the room taking notes, no secretaries softening the exchange, just William and Camilla facing each other directly, with years of tension finally about to explode into the open. William didn't yell when he confronted Camilla. That would have been too obvious. What he did was actually more unsettling because he arrived completely prepared. He had thought this through. He knew exactly what he was going to say and exactly why he was saying it. He closed the door and told Camilla precisely why her ceremonial role was being removed. She immediately pushed back, challenging his authority, claiming he had no right to make this decision. But William wasn't backing down. He challenged her judgment right back. And when Catherine's name came into the conversation, when they started talking about how Catherine had been treated, something happened that had been building for years. The tension between the future king and his stepmother finally broke through the surface and spilled out into the open. Camilla had expected a confrontation, but not one this direct. not one where William would be so firm about his reasoning. He told her that this wasn't about rank or jealousy or personal preference. This was about what had happened at Windsor after the earlier warning. Camilla had had ceremonial authority, which gave her influence, and William believed she had deliberately used that influence to humiliate Catherine twice, not once, twice. Camilla immediately defended herself, arguing that the royal hierarchy couldn't be completely rewritten every time Catherine felt uncomfortable. She insisted that seniority still mattered, that rank meant something, and she accused William of using his position as the future king to settle a personal family dispute. But William refused to accept that framing. He told her that dignity was exactly why he had acted. Catherine had stepped aside without protesting because she understood the burden of serving the crown, not because she actually accepted being made smaller. Her silence had been mistaken for weakness once before, and William refused to let it become permission for another public humiliation. When Camilla realized that wasn't working, she changed tactics. She warned William that removing a responsibility that belonged to the king's wife without getting Charles's explicit approval would put his father in an impossible position between his son and his wife. She figured that argument would make William back down, that concern for his father would soften his stance. But instead, William revealed something Camilla didn't know. Charles had already been told about the Buckingham Palace rehearsal. William had warned him privately after Catherine was moved from that receiving line, and the king had promised to address it. Camilla went completely still when she heard that. The realization hit her hard. Charles and William had discussed her conduct before Windsor even happened, which meant this confrontation had roots running far deeper than she'd understood. Camilla stood up from her chair and demanded to know if William intended to remove her responsibilities every single time she disagreed with Catherine. William remained seated for a moment, taking in the anger on her face. Then he stood up himself. When he spoke, his words were measured but absolute. Only when authority is used to humiliate her, nothing he said after that could soften those words or make them hurt any less. Camilla didn't apologize. William didn't take back what he'd said. Their meeting ended without any reconciliation, without any compromise, without any of the soft palace language designed to smooth things over. The decision had now reached Charles's desk, and it was the king who would have to make the final call. For the first time, Charles couldn't protect both relationships through silence. The conflict had reached his desk, and whichever direction he moved, someone he loved was going to be hurt. Charles had spent years learning how expensive divided loyalties could become. But now that division existed inside his own household, and he was right in the middle of it. On one side stood Camilla, absolutely furious that a role connected to her public position had been taken away. On the other side stood William, completely convinced that protecting Catherine was inseparable from protecting the entire future of the monarchy. Now, the king absolutely had the power to reverse what William had done. He could have simply issued a few instructions and restored Camilla's ceremonial role. But instead of doing that, Charles spent the evening carefully studying the ceremonial records, and what he discovered made defending the old arrangement incredibly difficult. The ceremonial file contained detailed notes from both the Buckingham Palace rehearsal and the later Windsor reception. These weren't just official documents. They showed a clear pattern. Catherine's position had been deliberately changed twice through personal discretion, not because protocol required it. The king could no longer dismiss this as a misunderstanding or a simple miscommunication. There was a pattern here, and it was intentional. William met with his father privately and refused to back down. He told Charles that he wasn't asking him to choose between his wife and his son. What he was asking was for his father to prevent ceremonial authority from becoming personal leverage against Catherine. The prince explained that Catherine had obeyed both times because she genuinely respected the institution and the crown, and that respect shouldn't be weaponized against her. Charles listened, and you could see the wound the accusation caused, but he also couldn't deny the logic of what his son was saying. Some advisors tried to offer a compromise. Camilla could quietly get the role back, but they would narrow its powers. William rejected that immediately. He said the symbolism would still be there. Catherine would know that nothing meaningful had actually changed, and the resentment would just keep growing underneath the surface. Charles understood the danger. A cosmetic solution might protect appearances while making everything worse underneath. So the king picked up his pen and made the decision. He approved a new protocol that would place Catherine and William's ceremonial positions under neutral household officials instead of Camilla. This officially confirmed her removal from that role. Charles paused with his pen still against the page because he knew what this decision would mean. He asked that Camilla hear the news from him personally, not from some staff member reading from a memo. He understood the cost that conversation would carry. The decision was now official, written down, and completely permanent. But when Camilla found out that Charles himself had approved this change, her anger would become something far more painful, the realization that she had lost this battle inside her own marriage. Camilla had expected resistance from William. What she absolutely had not expected was acceptance from Charles. When the king told her that the ceremonial change would remain permanent, she understood immediately that this wasn't some temporary punishment designed to cool everyone's tempers. Her husband had chosen not to rescue her from the consequences of her actions. For a woman who had spent decades fighting for acceptance within the royal system, struggling to move past the controversy that surrounded her, finally reaching a place where she felt secure and accepted, this emotional blow cut deeper than the role itself, and her response shocked even Charles. Charles delivered the decision himself, sitting down with Camilla and telling her that the revised protocol was going to stay in place permanently. Neutral ceremonial officers would now decide where Catherine stood during any shared appearances. The queen consort would keep her rank, her duties, and her place beside the king, but she would no longer have the power to control where the Princess of Wales stood during ceremonies. The boundary could not have been more clear if Charles had written it on a wall. Camilla stared at him, and then she asked the question that mattered most. "Do you really believe I deliberately humiliated Catherine?" Charles didn't accuse her of plotting the moment or of having some secret plan, but his answer still cut deeply into her. He said that whatever her intention had been, the result was humiliation. Catherine had been forced to step aside publicly, and that damage couldn't be erased by just insisting it had been a misunderstanding or an accident. Camilla's frustration turned harder. She warned Charles that allowing William's intervention to stand would make her look weak inside the family and beyond it, that her position would be damaged. But the king refused to be pulled into that argument. He told her that protecting appearances couldn't be more important than preventing another rupture between people who would need to work together for years and years to come. Camilla heard the deeper message immediately. He was no longer willing to preserve peace by pretending nothing had happened. Then Charles revealed something that completely stripped away Camilla's explanation for everything. Catherine had actually asked William not to escalate this dispute. The princess had never demanded Camilla's removal. She had asked her husband to please not turn one painful moment into a huge family war. That truth changed everything Camilla had been telling herself. This wasn't Catherine secretly using her husband as a weapon against a rival. William had acted because he believed a serious line had been crossed, and he was protecting his wife from having the same thing happen again. William made that difference even more clear when he spoke privately with his team afterward. He instructed them not to brief against Camilla, not to celebrate this decision, and not to frame her removal as some victory. He hadn't wanted a spectacle. He had wanted a boundary, a clear line that wouldn't be crossed again. Camilla sat alone after Charles left the room. She took the old ceremonial order, folded it once, and placed it inside a drawer. She shut that drawer harder than she intended, and in that moment, she had to face a truth she'd been avoiding. Even when you reach the highest position, even when you feel secure and accepted, everything can change in an instant, but the most important shift was still about to happen. Catherine was going to speak directly to the king, without William or Camilla in the room, without any palace people translating emotion into careful, safe language. And what she said would transform this entire conflict from a struggle over rank into a fundamental question about what kind of monarchy they wanted to become and what kind of institution they were building for the future. There were no advisors present when Catherine spoke to Charles. No William in the background, no Camilla trying to explain herself, no officials carefully translating raw emotion into diplomatic language. The princess didn't ask the king to punish anyone or celebrate the decision that had already been made. Instead, she told him what the humiliation had actually felt like, deep down, and she explained why she had remained completely silent in public when everyone was watching. Charles listened without interrupting a single time. By the end of their conversation, he understood that the deepest damage had never actually been about ceremony at all. Catherine had requested this meeting herself because she didn't want William's decision to be mistaken for revenge being carried out in her name. She needed Charles to understand her perspective, She told the king that royal duty often demands restraint. Sometimes discomfort has to be absorbed for the sake of stability. You have to swallow your pain to keep things running smoothly. But she said there's a real difference between that kind of personal sacrifice and being deliberately made smaller so that someone else can feel more secure and powerful. That distinction mattered because silence could protect the monarchy only for so long before it started protecting the wrong behavior, before it started allowing people to get away with things they shouldn't. Catherine then admitted what Windsor had really done to her, what the real damage was. Moving aside had been painful, sure, but that wasn't actually the worst part. The real humiliation came from knowing that literally everyone around her understood exactly why she had been displaced and moved back. The staff knew, the guests knew, William knew, and she knew that if she objected publicly or complained about it, the entire story would flip and suddenly she would be the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the person who couldn't handle the hierarchy. She had been trapped between two impossible choices: preserve her dignity by staying silent, or defend her dignity by speaking up and risk being destroyed in the press. Charles felt the weight of those words because he'd heard a warning before and he hadn't acted on it. William had spoken to him after the Buckingham Palace rehearsal, and Charles had chosen discretion over confrontation. He'd hoped the tension would fade away on its own. Instead, his silence had allowed the exact same pattern to return in a more public and more damaging form. For the first time, he could see that avoiding conflict hadn't created peace. It had simply delayed the explosion and made it worse when it finally came. Catherine surprised him one more time. She didn't ask for Camilla to be pushed aside completely or cast out of royal life. The princess said she wanted clear boundaries, not permanent exclusion. Camilla could keep her place, her duties, and her dignity. What she couldn't keep was the ability to turn private tension into ceremonial power used against Catherine. Charles finally understood William's actions differently. His son hadn't been trying to seize authority before his time had come. The prince had acted because he believed Catherine was being asked to endure something that Charles had already been warned about, something the king had done nothing to stop. Before Catherine left that room, the king spoke quietly. He said something simple but profound. "You should never have had to stand there and pretend it didn't hurt." Catherine didn't say anything at first, she just nodded. That private understanding changed everything. But within days, the decision would move beyond closed doors into the full view of the entire nation. One single rearranged royal appearance would expose this new order to the entire country and turn what seemed like a private family settlement into a national story that everyone would be talking about. The palace never announced any punishment or made any official statement about what had happened. It didn't need to, because when the next major royal ceremony took place, one single detail told the entire story to anyone paying attention. Catherine walked into the exact position from which she had previously been moved and displaced. Camilla stood elsewhere, completely removed from having any authority over the order of presentation. Within minutes, broadcasters were dissecting the arrangement, analyzing what it meant. Newspapers were preparing extraordinary front pages. Crowds outside Windsor were reacting to what looked absolutely unmistakably like a transfer of influence happening inside the monarchy, right before their eyes. Catherine entered the formal reception, standing right beside William, in the senior greeting position that had originally been assigned to her. This time there was no intervention from Camilla and no last-minute instruction asking the princess to move or step aside. Instead, a household ceremonial officer directed the sequence, meaning a neutral official was now managing the order of participation during the formal event. That change made one thing completely clear to everyone watching. Personal discretion had been removed from the equation. Catherine understood instantly how closely she was being watched by everyone around her and the entire nation. Every single expression could be interpreted as triumph, or resentment, or some kind of revenge. The princess therefore gave absolutely nothing away. She remained composed, spoke warmly to the guests, and refused to turn the moment into some kind of public victory parade. William stayed equally controlled beside her. The prince had fought hard for this change, but he knew that celebrating it would only deepen the wound already existing inside the family. Camilla performed her remaining duties without any incident. She didn't challenge the new arrangement or attempt to reclaim authority. But the queen consort briefly looked toward the position she had once helped control, and you could see that the emotional cost was impossible to ignore. Her rank remained completely untouched, but her influence had narrowed in front of everyone watching. By the following morning, the entire story had exploded across media and social platforms. A major London newspaper carried Catherine standing beside William across its front page, with a headline announcing the new order. The accompanying report focused directly on Camilla's loss of ceremonial authority and the growing influence of the future king and queen. Later that evening, a prime-time royal discussion framed William's intervention as the clearest sign yet that he would take direct action when Catherine's dignity and the stability of the entire next reign were threatened. Outside Windsor Castle, the public reaction became even more personal. A small crowd started applauding as Catherine arrived for an appearance. She responded with only a restrained smile and continued forward, completely refusing to feed into any sense of rivalry or victory. The public may have seen a victory playing out inside the family, but for those actually living it, it still felt like a wound that hadn't healed. The cameras had delivered their verdict with dramatic flair, but headlines couldn't create real reconciliation between people who would need to work together. One final conversation remained, and its outcome would decide what this entire crisis truly meant for Catherine, Camilla, William, Charles, and the monarchy itself, moving forward into the future. In the end, Camilla lost far less than a crown, a title, or a permanent place beside the king. She actually lost one ceremonial responsibility. That's all, just one role. Yet that narrow change carried absolutely enormous meaning because of what had forced it to happen in the first place. William had drawn a clear boundary around Catherine's dignity. Charles had chosen to uphold that boundary despite the personal cost. Camilla had been compelled to accept it, even though it hurt. And Catherine, after being publicly humiliated, had refused to turn her vindication into revenge. That combination of actions transformed what started as a family dispute into a defining royal reckoning that would be remembered for generations. Charles made the final settlement unmistakably clear and permanent. Camilla's former ceremonial coordinating role would not return. It was gone. Neutral household officials would permanently manage all placement involving William and Catherine during any future events. The arrangement was simple but powerful. The queen consort kept her rank and her remaining duties intact. She wasn't being driven from royal life or cast out into exile. The consequence was deliberately narrow, designed to address the specific problem without destroying her position entirely. But the boundary behind it was completely permanent and would never change. Catherine spoke privately with William after the public storm began to settle and calm down. She told him she understood completely why he had intervened, and she was grateful. But she wanted one specific promise from him going forward. Protecting her could never become an excuse for endless conflict that would tear the family apart. William agreed immediately. He explained that he hadn't acted to punish Camilla or to get revenge. He had acted because staying silent had already failed once, and he absolutely would not watch his wife be deliberately diminished again. It was that simple. Charles faced Camilla with equal honesty and directness. The king admitted that he should have responded much more firmly and decisively after the earlier Buckingham Palace rehearsal, instead of just hoping the tension would disappear naturally. Camilla still believed that William's reaction had been overly severe, but she finally accepted that Windsor had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. That admission didn't repair everything that had been broken. It did something actually more important. It ended the entire argument over whether the boundary even existed. It was real, and everyone had to accept that. Camilla later spoke directly to Catherine during a private family gathering, when it was just the two of them. She told the princess that she would no longer interfere with her ceremonial placement or try to control her position during events. Catherine didn't celebrate or make a big deal out of it. She simply thanked her for that commitment. There was no embrace, no dramatic forgiveness scene, and no attempt to pretend that all the pain had vanished like it never happened. But something important had shifted. Respect had finally replaced uncertainty. The final proof of that shift came at their next shared appearance together. Catherine took her assigned place without any hesitation or worry. Camilla arrived moments later and moved directly to hers. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Neither woman moved. Neither of them needed to, because everyone could see and understand the new order that had been established. William's decision had never truly been about humiliating Camilla in return or getting revenge. It was about ending a cycle in which Catherine's restraint and silence could be mistaken for permission to keep hurting her. Charles closed that destructive cycle by supporting the change despite the personal cost. Camilla confirmed it by accepting the limit that had been placed on her power. Catherine gave the entire resolution dignity by refusing to turn her vindication into revenge or public victory. What had started with public humiliation had ended with clarity and understanding. William emerged from this whole experience more protective and more willing to act decisively when needed. Charles emerged more decisive and more willing to take action instead of hoping problems would solve themselves. Camilla emerged more aware of the actual limits of her influence and power, and Catherine walked away with her dignity finally restored and protected. The monarchy survived not because the conflict was ignored or swept under the rug, not because everyone pretended it never happened. The monarchy survived because boundaries finally replaced bitterness, and real conversations replaced silence and avoidance. That's the real lesson here, and that's what we should all take away from this incredible story. I really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most fascinating royal stories in recent memory. This is exactly the kind of real, human drama that shows us what happens when people finally decide to stand up for what matters. If this story resonated with you, if you found yourself invested in Catherine's journey and impressed by William's courage to draw that line, then please smash that like button right now because it helps us create more of this content. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we cover stories like this constantly, and you absolutely don't want to miss the next one. Leave a comment down below telling me what you think about how William handled this situation, and share this video with someone you think would love it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.